I'm Andy. Welcome to Furniture Fables. If you grew up having the radio and the record player being the two main ways you heard the music that you craved, you may still have a special place in your heart for vintage vinyl. The graphic album covers and inserts, the way a freshly unwrapped jacket smelled, the care needed to protect the very tangible music you were carrying. You don't carry it from the, don't touch the top. You have to carry it from the sides. Sheesh. And of course, the now iconic crackle as the needle contacted the vinyl. Good stuff. And of course, all that vinyl needed furniture to house it in the manner it so richly deserved. Being lucky enough to have been bestowed our family's record player and record collection, it was no surprise that I jumped at the chance to scoop up this solid oak 70s record cabinet. It was neat. Its top compartment was built to house the player, while underneath the space was perfect for holding a nice amount of records. Someone had literally punched a hole in the back for components, cords, and it had the typical scuffs and dings, but other than looking pretty dirty, it was in pretty good shape. Looking at those tremendously awesome pulls, I was a bit perplexed. Were they fabulous or awful? I honestly wasn't sure, but what I did know was that for me, the dark oak and the heavy patina on those pulls gave the whole piece kind of a dungeony feel. But I had an idea on how to rescue this groovy girl and bring her into the light of day. I mixed up a concoction of warm water and some TSP substitute, and then using a Scotch pad and a scrub brush, I started in. I started to see pretty quickly that pretty dirty was an understatement, and that enough color was coming off as I scrubbed to suggest that perhaps this piece had been sitting in water for some time. You can see that line appearing as I scrub. Amazingly, the oak was fine. Not soft, not cracked, just, really, really dirty. Or gross, you could say gross. After the very thorough scrubbing and rinsing, I let the cabinet dry in the setting sun. The next morning, I came out and removed the top of the cabinet, as well as that rather epic door hardware. Because I wasn't 100% sure about my idea for this piece, I decided to use the underside of the top to conduct a little experiment. I gave the top a good sanding to remove the dark stain, as well as take out any little dings and scratches, and then I got out my Briwax Liming Wax. Liming wax is a product made to mimic the old cerused wood look of the 16th century. Yes, this look and techniques to achieve it have been around that long. Ceruse was a lead-based pigment which actually appeared first, if you can believe it, in European high society cosmetics. And as you can probably guess, that did not end well. Eventually, of course, the piece was banned for use in cosmetics, but the cabinet makers of the day realized it could be used to both lighten and highlight the natural grain of wood. Today's liming waxes contain a basic clear wax and are blended with a liming paste or white pigments or paints. So after I did my little test spot using my Briwax, I decided to go for an overall limed look. And so it was time to bust out the sanders. I decided not to remove the two front doors. Their hinges were in good shape, but old enough to make me a little wary of poking at them. So instead, I laid the piece on its back to sand the doors, and then just continued moving it around so I could hit all of the larger, flatter surfaces with my orbital sander. I used my Surf Prep sander for the carved wood detail on the front of the doors. It was great at getting into those grooves, as well as all of those trim details on that bottom piece. I actually did a pretty thorough sanding job. I started with an 80, then 120, then 180, and then ended with a 220 grit sandpaper. I am not a woodworking expert, not by a long shot, but my understanding is that the basic golden rule of sanding is to not skip more than one grit level in the order of grits that are available to you. Skipping grits can lead to sanding marks or swirls or a blotchy finish. So as time-consuming as it is, taking the time to go step by step with your sander is really important. So now that the entire cabinet was thoroughly sanded, I cleaned off all that dust with a tack cloth and then got my Briwax back out. I decided to use my Jolie natural fiber brush, even though this version of it is a pretty small-sized brush for the waxing job ahead of me. My larger brush that I have is not a Jolie brush. It's not a great quality brush, and it just sheds so much. So I decided to use my Jolie brush. I just took a little bit of wax at a time and started working it into the oak top. Now, you are actually supposed to wax across or against the grain, but as you will see, I sometimes would forget to do that. If you'll pardon the pun, it is so ingrained to go with the grain. But eventually I got better at it and found that working the wax in all directions is actually really good. Waxing does require a bit of muscle. You really do need to work it into the wood grain, and you can see that the more that I do that, the more the grain picks up that light pigment. I also found that I was less likely to get an uneven finish if my last strokes, my finishing strokes, were along the grain. After I'd completed a manageable section, I took my lint-free cloth and wiped back any excess and kind of buffed the liming wax in. You can lime any wood, but oak is such a great candidate for this. You can see how its deep, strong grain is really ideal for a lime wax treatment. So you can, of course, achieve a similar look with other techniques. You can stain. You may have seen my farmhouse fable where I used Dixie Belle's No Pain Gel Stain in Pickling White. Or you can use a paint wash. I used that technique on the base of my undonatable dresser fable, and there are benefits to each technique. One of the main reasons I really wanted to come back to liming and give it another try after not doing it for a long time is that it doesn't require any other steps. Because it is a wax, you are essentially providing a seal and a protective coat for the wood. It's true that Briwax suggests doing another coat of wax on top, but it does not require that step. And I even checked on Bob Vila's website, and Mr. Vila says you don't have to do any extra sealing after liming wax. So there you go. If Bob Vila says it, that should be good enough. So here you can see the difference between the two doors, one limed, one not. I continued to apply the wax to the inside of the doors, as well as that front plate piece for the upper cabinet compartment. After I had covered the entire exterior of the cabinet, I came back with a fine sanding paper and removed some pigment here and there just to create a more balanced look overall and to soften any visible existing brush strokes. Okay, so now to those fabulous, huge handles. While their patina was nice in some parts, in others it looked mighty rough and patchy, and overall was way too harsh and bossy against the new limed look of our cabinet. So I took them inside for a quick water and vinegar boiling bath. Using a 50-50 vinegar water mix, I boiled them for about 10 minutes, then removed them and took them back outside for a little more cleanup with some barkeeper's friend. If you wanted to do just a basic cleanup but leave a good part of the old patina, then that water vinegar bath with just a little buffing would most likely do the trick for you. I know that cleaning original hardware can be a bit controversial, but again, because of the very impressive size of these pulls and the light limed look I was going for, I felt that a true refresh was in order. I applied a bit of that barkeeper's friend, and then using a rag that was damp, I gently buffed off a lot of that tarnish. Wow, looking better already, but I may decide to take them even a bit further. But first, we must take a look back at the back of this piece. There was, of course, that hole, but I was also realizing that my hunch that this piece had sat in water was probably correct, given that the back panel was basically unraveling from the bottom up. I took a closer look at it. You know, it's always a shame to remove the back from a vintage piece, but there were no maker marks or stamps, and the one original sticker that had been placed on the back was long gone. So I decided the best thing was to remove and replace the back piece entirely, as opposed to trying to patch that very rough hole. So using my painter's tool and a hammer, I loosened the staples that were holding it to the cabinet and then gently pried it loose and pulled the remaining staples with my pliers. I picked up a piece of plywood from Home Depot and used the old piece as a template and traced the dimensions for the new back. Then I got out my cute little Ryobi table saw. Now, again, like I said before, I am not an expert woodworker, not at all. I am, like most folks, I am self-taught. I have learned through reading and watching and learning from other family members. If you wish to learn about woodworking and especially table saws and how to use them, I really suggest you check out Steve Ramsey, Woodworking for Mere Mortals, here on YouTube, because he is absolutely amazing. I am a subscriber and a huge fan of his channel. So after measuring the amount I was going to be removing, I set that measurement on the table saw and locked it in, and then turned on my saw blade. There's my push stick. Getting my other glove back on. And using the side edge of the table saw, carefully guided my piece through the saw blade, using that push stick at the end, so my hands, of course, didn't come anywhere near the blade. I had a friend there to catch that piece of plywood, which is always nice since this is such a petite little table. I then did the same process for the other side, measuring and adjusting the table measurement, locking that in, turning on my saw blade, and gently pushing that piece through. Hooray! It fits. It's always so nice when things fit. I took our new backing and gave it a good sanding with 220 grit disc, and then got out my Porter cable nail gun, which I love. You can see that these 1-inch nails won't work on this top section because they are too long, but they will do just fine everywhere else, and I can use a staple gun for that top section. So again, with my helper holding the piece in place, I attached it to the edges and along the sides using my nail gun. And then I switched to my staple gun to attach the top. Oh, it's always good to make sure you have it pointed in the correct direction. And there she is. The back is all done. Just one little staple to remove. Oh, so embarrassing. Then I used my liming wax again to just finish off that back so it would be nice and clean and consistent. And I even took a little bit of it over the hardware on the back to keep the look nice and soft and consistently dreamy. Okay, it's time for a true comedy of errors. It's wallpaper time. I got out some textured, old world looking peelable wallpaper that I had, and I began my hilariously inept version of adding it to the back wall. Of course, as per usual, the first piece went in looking pretty decent, and then I started on that second piece. I mean, seriously, I knew I needed to just take it out and trim it. You know, you could just measure it. I don't know what it is. I just have some sort of strange, stubborn block when it comes to wallpaper. So instead, I just did my thing where I wrestle it in and, you know, get annoyed with life. There it is sticking to me. Oh gosh. Okay. But in the end, look, it looks just fine. So no one will know except for everybody who watches this YouTube video. Okay, so let's move on. To finish off the inside, I decided to add more liming wax to the interior sides, the base, as well as the upper compartment. And you can see that the liming wax still works over surfaces that haven't been sanded. It just has kind of a different look. Then I reattached that hardware and I stood back and took a good look. Yeah, and decided that I did want to soften that brass up just a little bit more. I took a little bit of Jolie paint and using that same brush as before, the one that I had used to wax, I dipped it into the paint and then brushed off the majority of that paint onto my rag. This is of course called dry brushing, a technique you use when you just want a very small amount of paint. And I gently worked that white paint all over both of the handles. Then I came back in using a lint-free cloth to just kind of wipe back a little bit of that white paint on the handles and the decorative joining beads. And while that was all drying, I added a little bit of white wax to the leftover paint and mixed all of that really well together. I applied this mixture, this kind of more pigmented wax, or you could call it waxy paint, whichever, with a tongue depressor to the top of my brush, just so I could kind of skiff it on just the very, very top again. And again, wiped back any excess. And I applied that to any areas on the wood that I was seeing that still looked uneven or slightly blotchy, or where I just wanted a little bit more of that color. Okay, so back to the pulls. I then got out my Jolie Gilding Wax and using an artist brush, worked that over a good amount of the white paint. This is a great technique to create a really soft, aged look, kind of that old world brass look, where the aged appearance is created by the addition of light paint as opposed to a dark patina. It's almost like the metal has been limed as well. Our eye sees the original brass, some white, some of that lighter gilding wax, and even a little bit of the original patina, and together that creates this really soft, natural texture. For pulls like this with so much presence, both in size and in styling, it seemed like a really effective way to help marry them to the new limed wood. Finally, time to bring her in and put that top back on. So, do you remember our hole-punched, dank and dirty, and a little bit dungeony bottom of the charts record cabinet? And here she is now. Wow. Whether styled as a swanky bar or a decorative accent table, or storage for some extra blankets for snuggling up to watch a movie, or as her original job, helping to spin those tunes. I think the true star of this story is texture, that beautiful natural wood grain, elevated and highlighted by the liming wax. Now those bossy pulls seem to almost glow with a champagne effervescence. Funny enough, she's really the same as before, and yet completely different. In any case, I think this groovy 70s kid is enjoying the limelight. So how much did this old world make under cost me? Well, I used about 85% of that Briwax Liming Wax can, so I'll just throw in the whole cost of that, which was right at $23. That would have been my biggest cost, except of course I had to replace that whole back. So add another $15 for a piece of plywood. Then there was a little bit of white paint, a little bit of gilding wax, a little bit of wallpaper, etc., etc. So maybe another $15 for that, which puts me at a total out-of-pocket cost of $55. So what will I list it for? Well, some people really love this cerused wood look, while others, it's just really not their thing at all. But I think a solid oak cabinet, vintage 70s, with that original brass hardware, a price of $255 would be pretty fair and would give me a profit of $200. But when I saw that cabinet with the record player in it, and of course, all of those records, I started to think, maybe I'll keep this one. Ironically, I think it was the pulls that won me over. They look a little elven to me, which is kind of cool. And when am I going to find another record player cabinet? I really also like this limed look. I feel like it goes really, really well with our old farmhouse here. And I figure if someone else in the family wants to take the record collection someday, but they don't want the cabinet, this is one of those great all-around pieces. I think it's actually high enough that you could put a lamp on it, and it is so strong and sturdy, being made out of solid oak, that you could probably put it by a door and use it as a bench even. I don't think I'd want to do that because it's so pretty, but you could. I hope you feel encouraged to try out new products, tools, and techniques to achieve the looks that you would like to create. And I can tell you that there is a difference between a paint wash, a stain, and liming wax. And I'm finding the liming wax really, really pretty. And it's just a one-step process. If you'd like to rock out to some more Furniture Fables, please make sure to hit that subscribe button before you go. Like, share, comment, let me know. What do you think of the limelight? Thank you so much for joining me, my friends. I'll see you next time for more Furniture Fables.
There's a place I have found in the shade on the ground, far from all worries and troubling sound. When I go there to be by myself, only me, no one can guess what I came there to see. There's a sun in the sky, there's a cloud drifting by, all kinds of birds make you wish you could fly. And in the distance I see someone waving at me. I hope that it's you, but who else could it be? I guess it would be nice to belong in your arms. I hope you feel the same way too. Na 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 na. Shade on the ground, far from all worries and troubling sound. When I go there to be by myself, only me, no one can guess what I came there to see.